During a family dinner, I accidentally brushed past my stepmother. Her slap changed everything. I hadn't been back to Portland in over a year, and if I'm honest, I'd have kept it that way. But my father, Henry Carver, was turning 60, a milestone that felt like it demanded my presence, a chance to play at being a family again. I'm Elise, 34, an editor at a small publishing house in Seattle, where I've built a life far from the tangled roots of my childhood. That night, I drove into the Pearl District, parked near a trendy restaurant with ivy-draped walls and Edison bulbs glowing like fireflies, and steeled myself for what I hoped would be a civil evening. The private dining room was packed. Cousins, aunts, Henry's golf buddies all gathered for his big 60. The air smelled of roasted garlic and artisanal cocktails, but beneath the clink of glasses there was a tension I knew too well. I took a seat near the end of the long table, next to Lila, my stepsister. Lila, 5 years younger, had always been Vivian's golden child, the one who called her mom and got the bigger slice of cake. Growing up, we were pitted against each other, though I never fully blamed her. Tonight, she looked off, pale, fidgety, offering me a smile that felt more like a question than a greeting. Vivian, my stepmother, presided at the table's head, her silk blouse catching the light, her smile as polished as ever. She'd moved into our lives a year after my mother died of ovarian cancer when I was 16. A slow, cruel loss that left my father adrift. Vivian, his former colleague, a financial advisor with a knack for control, didn't just fill the void, she reshaped it. She reorganized our kitchen, repainted my mother's walls, and decided I should study business, not literature. When I pushed back, she called me ungrateful, troubled, a shadow of my mother's flaws. Henry never corrected her, and I left for college at 18, a scholarship my ticket out. Dinner was a performance of polite chatter, small talk about Henry's golf swing, the restaurant's truffle fries. I kept quiet, sipping my wine, hoping to get through the night. Halfway through the main course, I stood to use the restroom. On my way back, a waiter with a towering tray of desserts swerved into my path. I sidestepped, my hip grazing Vivian's chair. Not enough to jolt her, just a nudge. The room seemed to freeze as she turned, her eyes locking onto mine. Before I could speak, her hand cracked across my cheek, sharp and loud like a whip in a silent room. The sting was nothing compared to the humiliation. Every head turned. Family, strangers, waitstaff. The restaurant, already hushed, dropped into a void of silence. Vivian leaned close, her voice a venomous hiss only I and those nearest could hear. "You're just like your mother." Her words cut deeper than the slap, slicing open a wound I'd spent years stitching shut. I looked to my father, seated beside her, his fork poised over his salmon. He stared at his plate, jaw tight, as if it held the answer to why his daughter had just been struck in public. I waited. 1 heartbeat. 2, for him to speak, to stand, to do anything. Nothing. The weight of his silence crushed me, heavier than Vivian's hand. My face burned, not from the slap, but from the eyes on me, the pity, the curiosity. I didn't scream or cry. I turned, walked out, past the ivy walls and into the cool Portland night. In my car, I didn't call anyone or break down. I drove to my Airbnb, sat on the bed in my coat, and felt something shift inside me. Not a snap, but a quiet unraveling, like a knot finally slipping free. That night, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. The Airbnb I'd rented was a sleek loft in Portland's Alphabet District, all exposed brick and mid-century furniture. But that night, it felt like a cage. I sat on the bed, still in my coat, the city's hum filtering through the window. The sting of Vivian's slap lingered on my cheek, but it was my father's silence, Henry's refusal to even look at me, that cut deeper. I'd spent years swallowing the pain of his passivity, of Vivian's calculated cruelty, but something had shifted. The quiet unraveling I'd felt in the car wasn't despair. It was clarity. I couldn't go back to pretending. I pulled my laptop onto my knees and opened a subreddit I'd lurked on for years. Toxic families. It was a corner of the internet where people like me, survivors of manipulation and silence, found solace. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant. Writing it down meant admitting how much it hurt, how much I'd let slide. But the alternative was letting Vivian's version of me, troubled, ungrateful, win. So I typed. I poured out the dinner, the slap, Vivian's hissed words, "You're just like your mother." I wrote about the years before. Her moving into our home months after Mom's death, redecorating my mother's spaces, telling Henry I needed fixing. I used fake names, kept it vague enough to shield myself, and hit post. Then I shut the laptop and stared at the ceiling, expecting nothing. By morning, my phone was buzzing. The post had exploded. Thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments. Strangers wrote, "Yeah, you're not crazy. That slap was abuse. Your dad's silence is complicity." Some shared their own stories, echoes of my own. I read until my eyes blurred, each word a tether pulling me out of the loneliness I'd carried since I was 16. Then a private message popped up from a username I didn't recognize. "Elise, it's Lila. I read your post. I know it's you. I believe you. Can we talk?" Lila, my stepsister, Vivian's daughter, the one I'd always seen as her ally. I didn't trust it. Not at first. Growing up, Vivian had made us rivals. Lila the perfect daughter, me the problem. But her message felt different. Raw. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near Powell's Books. A cozy spot with mismatched mugs and the smell of roasted beans. I arrived early, clutching a latte, my nerves jangling. Lila walked in, no trace of Vivian's polish, no makeup, just a hoodie and tired eyes. She looked like she hadn't slept. "I'm sorry," she said, sliding into the booth. "I didn't know how bad it was for you. Not really." Her voice was soft, but there was a crack in it, like she was holding something back. She told me she'd always felt Vivian's control, subtle with her, overt with me. The slap at the dinner had shaken her, not just because it was cruel, but because it revealed Vivian's true face. "I overheard her talking to Dad later," Lila said, staring into her coffee. "She said you deserved it, that you've always been out to ruin her. I couldn't stay quiet anymore." I listened, my guard still up, but her words rang true. Lila wasn't here to defend Vivian. She was breaking free too. We talked for hours, piecing together years of manipulation. Texts Vivian sent Lila about me, moments she'd pitted us against each other. By the time our cups were empty, we'd made a plan. Not revenge, but truth. We'd gather proof, texts, photos, anything we could find, and show Henry who Vivian really was. As I left the coffee shop, the weight of the night before felt lighter. I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, Lila wasn't my rival. She was my partner in dismantling the lie we'd both lived. The plan Lila and I hatched wasn't about destruction. It was about excavation, digging up the truth buried under years of Vivian's lies. We spent the day after our coffee shop meeting combing through old texts, emails, and photos I'd stashed in a forgotten cloud folder. I found a picture from when I was 17, Vivian in our kitchen, her finger inches from my face, her mouth twisted in a snarl. Lila pulled screenshots of texts Vivian sent her, one from a year ago. "Elise will always be a burden unless your father sees her for what she is." A bitter echo of her mother. The worst was a letter I'd found after Mom's death, tucked in her jewelry box, warning about Vivian's too close friendship with Henry. Her cursive was steady but urgent. "I'm afraid for Elise if things change." Each piece felt like a brick, heavy but solid for the wall we were building. We chose the family home in Portland's West Hills, a craftsman with cedar shingles and my mother's rose bushes still blooming out front. Vivian had claimed it as hers, but it was my mother's down payment that bought it, her taste in the stained glass windows. Lila and I arrived before Henry and Vivian returned from the birthday dinner, their voices carrying from the driveway, Vivian's laugh sharp and performative. I sat on the couch, the folder on the coffee table, its contents fanned out like a hand of winning cards. Lila stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed, her face a mix of resolve and nerves. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Henry stepped through the door first, keys jangling, his smile fading when he saw me. Vivian followed, mid-sentence about some cousin's bad toast, and stopped cold. Her eyes flicked from me to Lila to the folder, and for a split second, I saw her calculating, already spinning a story. "What is this?" Henry asked, setting his keys on the hall table, his voice slow, wary. I didn't speak. I slid the folder toward him. He sat across from me, the couch creaking under his weight, and opened it. The first page was a printout of my subreddit post, anonymized but unmistakable. The slap. The silence, the years of Vivian's control laid bare. His face paled as he read, his fingers tightening on the edges. Vivian stood rigid, arms crossed, her head tilted like she was waiting for a punchline. "This is absurd," she said, her voice cutting like glass. "Elise, you've always been dramatic, twisting everything to make me the villain." Lila stepped forward, her voice steady but low. "It's not just her, Mom. You need to see the rest." She turned the page to the text screenshots. Henry's eyes lingered on the one calling me a burden, his jaw clenching. Vivian flinched, barely, but enough for me to notice. "Out of context," she snapped. "A frustrated moment. You're blowing this out of proportion." I turned to the next page, Mom's letter. Henry's hands shook as he read her words, her fears about Vivian, her love for me. The room was silent except for the faint tick of the mantel clock. Vivian's composure cracked. "She's poisoning you, Henry," she said, gesturing at me. "She's been hoarding these lies for years, waiting for her moment. You think it's a coincidence she's here now for your birthday?" "She didn't slap herself," Lila said, her voice flat but piercing. "I saw it. Everyone did. You looked at her like you hated her, and you said she was like her mother. I heard you." Vivian's eyes narrowed, pivoting to Lila. "You're turning on me now? After everything I've done for you? You've been distant, Lila. Jealous. I see it now." Henry closed the folder. His face was gray, his breathing slow. He stood, looking at Vivian, his voice soft but sharp. "You told me Elise was exaggerating, that she was troubled, that she wanted to punish me for moving on. She left because of you." Vivian's mouth twisted, but before she could speak, he added, "I let her leave." The admission hung heavy, a confession of his own guilt. Vivian grabbed her purse. "This is pathetic," she hissed. "I'm done here." She stormed out, the door slamming so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed was suffocating, pressing against my skin. Lila and I stood still. Henry sank back onto the couch, and for the first time, the house felt like it might be ours again. Vivian didn't vanish quietly. A week after she stormed out of the West Hills house, a letter arrived from her lawyer, crisp and formal, announcing her filing for legal separation. She demanded spousal support, half the family home, and, absurdly, a collection of porcelain figurines, delicate dancers and shepherds that had belonged to my great-grandmother, passed to my mother, and meant for me. She claimed Mom had gifted them to her before she died, a lie so bold it almost made me laugh. The house, bought with Mom's inheritance, was the real prize. Vivian had spent 15 years acting like it was hers, but I knew the truth, and I wasn't letting her rewrite it. Henry was rattled, his hands trembling as he handed me the letter. "She can't do this, can she?" he asked, his voice thin. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I called Lila, who recommended a lawyer her friend swore by, Mira, a no-nonsense divorce attorney with a reputation for handling high-conflict cases. We met her in a sleek downtown Portland office, where she spread the letter across her desk and raised an eyebrow. "She's banking on intimidation," Mira said, tapping the paper. "Let's see what she's really got." Mira dug into the property records and found gold. The house was solely in Henry's name, purchased before he married Vivian. Mom's down payment was documented, and Vivian had never been added to the deed. The figurines were another matter. I'd found a document in Mom's old files, a will addendum listing them as mine when I turned 30. I was 34 now, and Vivian's claim was baseless. Mira grinned as we handed her the evidence. Texts, photos, Mom's letter, even a therapist's note about the slap's emotional toll. "This," she said, "is a slam dunk." The mediation was set for a gray morning in a sterile conference room, all glass walls and polished wood. Vivian arrived in a stiff beige suit, her face a mask of forced dignity, her young lawyer shuffling papers nervously. Henry sat beside me, Mira on my other side, her briefcase open like a weapon ready to fire. I watched Vivian, expecting her usual confidence, but there was a tightness in her jaw, a flicker of doubt. She knew we had something. Mira started with the house, presenting the deed and Mom's financial records. Vivian's lawyer stammered, citing her emotional labor as grounds for a share. Mira didn't blink. She slid Mom's letter across the table, then the texts, including one where Vivian called me a burden. Henry's face tightened as he heard it read aloud. When Mira brought up the figurines, I handed her the will addendum. Vivian's eyes widened, just for a second before she recovered. "Those were a gift," she insisted, but her voice lacked its usual bite. Mira leaned forward, her smile sharp. We're prepared to walk away quietly, no public fuss. But Ms. Carver gets nothing from the house, none of the figurines, and no spousal support. If you decline, we'll countersue for emotional abuse, wrongful interference with estate assets, and intentional distress. We'll share these texts with family, friends, your colleagues. Your call. The room was still. Vivian's hands clenched in her lap, her lawyer whispering urgently in her ear. She stared at Henry, but he wouldn't meet her gaze, his eyes fixed on the table. Finally, she nodded, her lips a thin line, her eyes burning with something like hatred. It was over. Mira gathered her papers, and we left without a word. Back at the house, Henry poured coffee, his hand steadier now. "It's really ours," he said almost to himself. I nodded, the weight of the victory settling in. It wasn't just about the house or the figurines. It was about reclaiming what Vivian had tried to erase. But the exhaustion lingered, a reminder that winning didn't erase the years of silence. Still, for the first time, I felt like we could start to heal. The weeks after the mediation felt like the calm after a storm, not peaceful but clear, the air sharp with possibility. Henry started therapy, a choice he made without prodding, and called me every Sunday, his voice softer than I remembered. I stayed in Portland longer than planned, working remotely from Lila's cozy Buckman apartment, its walls lined with vintage postcards and knitted throws. The West Hills house, once Vivian's domain, began to feel like home again, its rose bushes blooming as if Mom were still tending them. One afternoon, Henry invited me over, a photo album open on the kitchen table, old prints Mom had arranged from a Cannon Beach trip when I was 9. I'd collected seashells, built lopsided sandcastles, and laughed as Mom wore her hideous straw hat. Henry flipped to a photo of us 3, her handwriting beneath. Elise's first wave chase, so much joy. He paused, his fingers tracing her words. "I lost myself after she died," he said, eyes red but dry. Vivian filled the space, and I didn't question it. "I'm sorry, Elise." The words didn't erase the years, but they were a start, a crack in the wall we'd built. He surprised me that day, handing me a document. "It's half the house," he said. "Your mother's share, for you." My name was on the deed alongside his, a quiet promise kept. I didn't cry, but I felt something settle, like a stone finding its place in a riverbed. The house, with its stained glass windows and Mom's roses, was ours, untouchable by Vivian's grasp. Lila and I grew closer, no longer rivals but survivors of the same quiet war. We took a weekend trip to the Oregon coast, staying in a weathered cabin near Haystack Rock. Over coffee, we sifted through old photos from the house, laughing at Henry's bad 90s sweaters and Mom's obsession with mismatched mugs. One night, we unpacked the porcelain figurines from storage, tiny dancers and shepherds, their glaze catching the cabin's lamplight. Mom's initials, etched on each base, felt like a whisper from her. We set them on the table, not as relics, but as part of us, fragile yet enduring. Vivian faded like a bad dream. Word came she'd moved to a condo in Tigard, trying to spin her story to distant relatives. But the truth had spread too far. Her silence wasn't protection anymore. It was isolation, a consequence she'd earned. I didn't gloat or post her downfall online. The victory wasn't in her ruin, but in what we'd reclaimed. I'm back in Seattle now, but the house in Portland is home in a way it hasn't been since I was 16. Lila visits, crashing in the guest room, her laughter filling spaces Vivian once controlled. Henry's calls are steady, sometimes just to share a memory of Mom, a recipe she loved, a song she hummed. The figurines sit on my shelf, their delicate forms a reminder of what I fought for. This isn't a fairy tale ending. It's messier, real, but it's enough. Sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's living in the house your mother built, your name on the deed, your sister's voice in the next room, and her porcelain dancers in your hands, knowing no one can take them away again.